Welcome back. It's still the morning brief right here on Channels Television, and we're making progress, of course, on our conversation on the Senate's approval of electronic transmission of results with manual backing, while also looking at other subjects affecting the state of the nation. And joining us now is Mr. Omoyele Sowore, presidential candidate of the AAC in 2023 election, and of course, human rights activist. He's right there in our Abuja studio. Mr. Sowore, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start this way. It was interesting to see you yesterday with other new members of the civil society talking about former Minister of Transportation, former Minister of Sports. It was interesting to see some members of the political class in the trenches with you. But we'll get to that part of the conversation later on. But let's weigh in on the high point of yesterday, which was the Senate's decision to approve electronic transmission of results with manual backing. Of course, that has drawn a number of reactions, especially with the explanation provided by the Senate spokesman yesterday on our political program. You know, how are you weighing in on what the Senate's explanation for its position to be on this critical part of our electoral process?
I don't think I need any explanation from a spokesperson of the Senate. What we know or we heard is that the provision for electronic transmission of results wasn't made mandatory. And what we asked for and what led to most of us to join the barricades yesterday was for them to be very clear that this must be made mandatory, that those beavers machine, which are in two modes, that's why they call them bimodal verification machines, would be able to take a shot of the results and transmit to INEC portal. It may happen immediately if there's network, but it could happen wherever it finds network. But what is most important is that a process must be started as soon as the elections are concluded, that when the shot of the final result paperwork is taken, it will go to the IRF portal where people can immediately view each of the polling units across the country. That was not made mandatory in what was passed by the Senate, according to what we know. What they did was to be clever by half in saying, well, wherever there is no opportunity to transmit, we'll have it back, we'll accept the hard copy. And what that means when you deal with these characters is that they will always then go to court and say, well, this is not mandatory. And the judges will rule that there's no provision in the law that says it's mandatory. So you still go back to your hard-coded way of reporting election results that had made elections very, very incredible process. When I say incredible, you know what I mean. Like, you know, that's why people don't trust the electoral process. This is just to instill a little bit of trust. I said it yesterday and I'll repeat it again. I am not even a fan of these old systems. By now, we should be doing what they're doing in India. India has 900 million registered voters, and they use electronic voting as their own way of expressing the wishes of the people. And those are almost foolproof. I don't think you hear a lot of tribunal sittings in India after 900 million people vote. And we have only 90 million people here. We should be able to go for electronic voting. And like I said, if you can vote, you know, using these electronic processes to send money to people and do other transactions that are confidential, why can't we vote, you know, from our homes instead of having to roam the world, vote, and then at the end of the day, the elections are not even credible, and you end up electing people who you didn't vote for.
Let's look at the House's position against the Senate's position. The House is, in December, approved electronic transmission from each polling unit to the IRF portal in real time, and each transmission to be done simultaneously with the physical collation of results. With this contrast between the position of the House and that of the Senate, does it give some form of credibility to the legislation process of the National Assembly as a whole? Should we trust the National Assembly?
Obviously, we can't trust them. Even when these two positions are harmonized, which is what they said they would do, we still have to come through the fine print of what is in the final law they are going to pass. What I suspect, and I know these people to do, is that they're not worried about you. They're not worried about the public. They are covering up in advance for what will happen in the courtrooms in the future. They don't want a situation where the judges are hamstrung by a definitive word, shall or must. What we're saying here is that the language of these electoral acts must make it mandatory for elections to be transmitted. And wherever that is violated, you must be able to provide credible evidence or excuse. And then, the threshold to prove that this wasn't done is not on the side of those who are rigging election. And that is exactly what they are trying to avoid. They don't want to make it mandatory. And the excuse is that we don't have night network in 9 states. So if you don't make it mandatory, they can just shut down all the networks in the country. It doesn't cost them anything to shut down networks in the country. All these people who are telling you that there's no network in the country, there's nowhere in the country that you can't reach them, because there are several ways to get network to work on these devices. A bimodal machine, or a BIVAS as they call it, is something that can work with any kind of network. And people have said that INEC should deploy Starlink network to power them. That's another possibility. But I think that their excuse is not credible, because even in places where they shut down network deliberately in those years, terrorists are sending live content to the internet on TikTok, on Facebook, Twitter. So this excuse that there is no network in that state is just another baloney on the part of these guys. They don't want transparent elections because they know that if elections are transparent, 90% of them will not make it to the National Assembly. And, of course, the presidency and other elected positions. They know that.
All right, Mr. Sowore, I want us to, again, try to operationalize or do a real-time enactment of what we have now and how it will change significantly if we were to have the provision strictly electronic transmission. So once you're done voting, right, the votes are collated manually. So manual voting, manual collation, and then they fill it out. That's the presiding officer fills it out on the form EC8A. That's, I don't know whether to call it infamous now or famous form EC8A. So they say AAC has this number of votes, the APC, the ADC, PDP has these number of votes. Now, what happens is with the BIVAS, the PO is meant to take a picture of that EC8A and upload it to the INEC's result viewing portal, IREV. Right? And then they transport both the EC8A and the BIVAS to the Word Collation Center, where it is also tabulated in that sense manually. But at least the EC8A should already be on IREV, where Nigerians can view. And it is also mandated to a large extent that you're meant to compare, at least with this new proposal that people are pushing for, you're meant to compare the physical copy that you get at the Word Collation Center with what is on the IREV to see if there's any discrepancy. Does it match, right? So with this new provision or this new proposal that you're asking for, how does it significantly change what is already in practice? Because the IREV is a result viewing portal. It cannot be used for collation in that sense, right?
Yes. If you listen to me yesterday at the rally or the protest, I said it that even in the best of circumstances, the IREV is a portal for viewing rigged or unrigged election results. That's the truth. But for those who are interested in incremental progress, they're saying, even at that, let's just be able to view these results as soon as they have been collated, so that nothing more happens after we have gone to sleep, because a lot of things happen overnight. So that is what people are demanding for, and that's what I went there to support or solidarize. But my preference is not even this. This is, in my view, outdated, because even in circumstances where the IRF is functional at 100% capacity, you are basically viewing a result that has already been decided whether it is rigged or not. And in circumstances where the elections have been rigged, which they do regardless, you are only looking at the results that has been processed by the demons at the polling units. But people are saying, regardless, let's have that. And I support that. And that is why I said, look, if people can have more faith in the system because certain things are in place, then we can step on that podium and demand for greater things. But I'm saying it publicly here, that if you ask me what's my preference, that's an outdated process. And I feel like maybe part of the reason why they're doing this is because they don't want the public to ask for more serious, transparent means of electioneering. So they get you bogged down with the old one so that you don't ask for what is new and what is creative and what is progressive. But we also cannot discountenance what the public wants as the way forward for credible elections, since we don't have much time right now. Because if you are demanding for electronic voting, they'll tell you it's impossible in the next 1 year. I had a meeting between the INEC chairman and political parties last week, and he said he was in India, and the Indians told him, why are you wasting your time with beavers? Because almost the only country in the world that's using beavers, Nigeria. I don't know. You rarely find it. Even if you Google the word beavers, it keeps taking you to Nigeria. That means it's not a popular electioneering device globally. But that's what they use. And the Indians told him that we can help you provide electronic voting. And what electronic voting does is that you just go there, you put in your name, it shows you that you're a registered voter, and it gives you options for the ballot papers digitally. You look at it and say, which party do you want to vote for? You check it, it asks you, are you sure? You said yes. You print, and it sends a copy of your result to your email or your WhatsApp or your phone number. So you have a copy of who you vote for. And if they rig it, we can present that evidence in seconds. And that is what is done globally, But the fear most have raised is that, that could be tampered with. Well, I tell them, you have a global banking system that's almost digitalized. You can improve all of these processes by using technologies that are out there that makes this foolproof. But this physical hard coding of or handing over ballot papers and voting has shown over time to be fraud. And as we continue to use it, we are just dragging ourselves back when the rest of the world has moved on with better systems. Or you can have a process that is hybrid, where in places where people have no access to digital voting processes or methods, you can have these physical ones, and they are then easier to count, and you spend less time counting them because most people by 12 noon would have carried out voting across the country without having to go and queue up, without having to use all these outdated machines that are very expensive and very difficult to maintain. Because what will happen is that apart from just linking up with a network, a lot of these machines can be programmed in advance by INEC officials. A lot of them I've heard about in advance, and rig the outcome before you even get to the polling unit. So, but you need each of these voters, individual voters, educated voters, and a lot of them, I tell you, majority of Nigerians now know how to use devices to do a lot of things. Banking, they're using it to order food, you are using it to write exams, you are using it to view your results. I mean, why are we still, living in the Stone Age in this manner? This is some question we should ask us, a serious question about where we are in terms of making digital progress in this country. But I know they want this to become a controversy so that you won't have time to ask for any other thing.
Right.
And let me tell you, they're also planning to do elections in November. So that leaves you with less time to plan why they're already planned and they have everything set to it. And before you know it, they've come again.
Now that you paint it that way, it's important to properly analyze all of these issues, just sit down and get a better sense of it. And we've seen, as Bukola described them, new members joining, civil society, former members of the APC, former ministers in the Buhari government. Now on your side, in that sense, did you feel any sort of way seeing them, these same people that you've spoken against?
No, look, they're politicians, and they will always act on the side of the divide that butters their bread. And so I wasn't surprised to see them, but we welcome them. We welcome the new activists, but you know that they are fair weather friends to the activist community. They will do this for a little bit. After a while, they'll move back to their comfort zones. But, it just shows you that whenever their interests are affected, they know what to do. But, when their interest is not affected, they mock those of us who protest. They'll look at you, you're wasting your time. But it's very interesting to see Amechi yesterday. He even brought his son and claimed that his son is a doctor who wants to treat anybody that's injured by the police. It's all a game, but please just have a hearty laugh wherever you are about this, our new activist brothers and sisters.
I honestly can't help but
I saw Loretta Onoche there too, who was one of the most rabid supporters of Buhari when Buhari was in power for 8 years. So, yeah, that's why I said welcome our new activist brothers and sisters. But one of the things I said when I was first invited to the protest, I told the organizers on Sunday that it's also important that these politicians for whom you protest are forced to come and protest for their own, whatever interest it is. Because where you get the insult the most from is that they will never protest, they won't fight for anything, they don't endanger their lives. For those of us who do on a daily basis or on an hourly basis, they'll tell you that, that's your job, that's your destiny. And their destiny is to run the country to the ground while you pick up the pieces every year, every day, every hour, every week. So let them come and see how it feels like, but this is not the real test of activism. Because I'm sure their police friends who are their brothers in crime decided not to tear gas yesterday because they were coming. If this was Sowore strictly protesting, you would have seen a different police force yesterday. In fact, when I arrived, they brought in, the usual police who are very, very brutal. And I had to warn them that if they do anything funny, it will change the game.
We were wondering what sense to make of that new entry into the trenches yesterday, and that's why we resolved to ask you what it felt like having new members of civil society who were former ruling party members. And well, from what you have said, we hope that Nigerians can, make the differentiation between what's really happening and, what obtained before. But speaking of what we should be making sense of, let's transit to another important aspect of the state of nation, just as critical as electronic transmission of results, which is the Port Harcourt Refinery. after years of back and forth, we saw what seemed to work for a while, and then we saw a closure for repairs. And now what we have is the NNPCL saying reopening will be a waste of resources. What sense should we be making of the management so far of this critical infrastructure, and of course the impact that it is supposed to have on what would be an overall consumption, domestic consumption of critical petroleum products?
You know, when they started the repairs of these refineries, I think I was on your show. I had been on one of these TV stations that I said, these guys are just engaging in criminal activities. This is complete financial fraud. And I also mentioned that after the completion of the so-called completion of the turnaround maintenance that they were doing there, that you can only turn around, maintain a facility that exists. They already killed the refinery. They killed the refineries for their own private interest so that they can engage in massive importation of these products and scam the public. But what you should also understand is that it's the same country that can't repair its 2 refineries, I think we have 4 of it, that has helped Dangote to build this refinery. In fact, when Dangote's refinery was commissioned, even though it had not started working then, there was nobody in this country, maybe no politician, maybe except myself, who didn't go there to commission it. They helped him find forex. They provided land for him, drove all the villagers away, and although he later claimed he paid Lagos State government officials $100 million that didn't make it to the real owners of the land. But these same people cannot repair their own refineries. If they were serious, by the time they started the repairs, they could have built completely new refineries in Port Harcourt, the Warri, and Kaduna. But they did this on purpose. They wanted to steal a lot of money. And the refinery repairs was something they know would appeal to the sentiment of the public. Maybe we'll have local refineries and refining, it will be cheaper. It's not as if they can't repair these platforms or even build new ones beside them, but they have no desire whatsoever. The desire was to steal, to defraud the country. And that is why we should not be talking about whether a refinery is open or not now. We should have people handcuffed, going in and out of courtrooms to explain where the money went and how to retrieve the money from them. They set up this scam just to defraud the country. That was the idea, that was the desire by the Buhari regime and all the men and women who participated in the so-called repairs. It wasn't meant to work, even though they allocated huge sums of money to repair or turn around or maintain the refineries. They knew it wasn't going to work. They started the same bogey in Kaduna, and I made it clear on TV that Kaduna doesn't have oil wells. They rely on pipelines to take this oil, the crude oil, from the Niger Delta to Kaduna. Most of the pipelines have been ruined as of 20 years ago. But let me shock you. They also do provide funds for people during the Buhari regime who are protecting those pipelines to Kaduna that don't exist. In fact, one of the guys who used to get the contract sued me for libel, for reporting on this scam.
Well, and I know that the question for a lot of people is, will heads roll? If heads will roll, whose heads should roll in that sense? Because I think what has been lacking largely is consequences for these sorts of actions. So for you, should heads roll? If yes, what heads should roll? Or whose heads should roll? In a manner of speaking, that is.
Heads should roll. Yeah, this, is the ESCOs of NNPC who started the scam. Members of the Buhari regime who partook in sharing the funding from the Ministry of Finance, Central Bank. The paperwork is all over, it's littering all over the place. So we know the heads that should roll, but you don't have you know, you don't have the agencies that can make heads roll. So we're going to see some arrests, which has already happened, and there's going to be some media hype about it. And then, if your head is in the right party, it can't roll. So if they're already in APC, which most of them are already in, there's nothing that will happen to them. But I hope that someday, these guys will pay for the atrocities committed against the people of this country. It is crime against humanity what they did at all levels. But it should not be the type of rolling of heads that is not substantial. That is just just scratching the surface. Because these are deep financial scams that, if they are properly treated or they are properly handled, can revive the economy of this country, the recoveries from it, and then can prevent future thieves and robbers from carrying out this type of heist of the national treasury. This is terrible. We're talking about over $3 to $4 billion, $7 billion that was stolen repairing Warri, Kaduna, and Port Harcourt Refinery that has not produced even vapor since it was concluded. And when those of us who knew this were saying it, they were fearing journalists and private jets to go and lie. In fact, when Port Harcourt Refinery started, it wasn't producing any fuel. They would bring fuel overnight to the place, line up. You saw the scam, because the media was also in on it, unfortunately. Some mainstream media people partook in lying to the Nigerian public about how this crime was carried out. They were accessories to it. I'm not accusing anybody of it. I'm saying the truth about how this took place.
All right, Mr. Sowore, let's move from the issue around petroleum industry to another issue that's been with us for as long as I can remember, national security. We saw the incident in Sowore, in Kwara State, and we've seen successive incidents. And in your view, what exactly has to happen for government to be responsible or responsive enough? We see efforts, but it looks like for every effort of government, the people just regroup and say, okay, you've got us on this, then we're going to do more damage. If you want to characterize it, first help us characterize what is playing out. Help us also understand, for instance, if you were a leader of this country, what would you have done to make Nigeria safer?
So to characterize what is happening is complete breakdown of the security apparatus of the country. And it didn't break down overnight. It started breaking down when we started prioritizing making insecurity a business. When I say business, it's that the moment you have people within our security services whose job it is to be contractors instead of doing military work or doing police work, then you kill the security agencies. And you add that to incompetence, you add that to corruption. What you get is what you're getting now. Nobody's out there, except on an ad hoc basis, fighting this insecurity the way any country that's in a state of emergency that we are in now would fight it. Everybody's just putting ad hoc measures in place. Things that are supposed to be done by the police is done by a task force. And when you hear task force in Nigeria, it's not the police. The police is at the background. They will use hunters, they will use vigilantes, and then whatever happens, happen. Because the police as a unit, and that's why I paid a lot of attention to policing in recent years. The police as a unit, the Nigerian police, if it was doing its job, it was doing policing, not harassing and intimidating people on behalf of landlords and protecting the elite. The police could have reduced insecurity through proper policing by almost 90% of what you get now. What I mean is that if there was real policing in the country, even the movement of some of these lethal weapons for insecurity or for terrorism, banditry, will be nipped in the bud by the police. The police, if it was doing policing, would have been able to stop and search some of these criminals as they move things, as they move weapons, they move equipment, they move food, they move medicine across board to equip themselves in a lethal way. But when you're talking about insecurity in Nigeria today, you can almost remove the police entirely from it, and it's because the police is rotten, both at the leadership, particularly at the leadership level, and they have zero motivation because you pay them peanuts and you expect them to go and die for you. They have nowhere to live. Their barracks are decayed. You don't pay them salaries. When you transfer them to another place, you don't pay them transfer allowances. You don't pay them, medical. You don't have life insurance for people who put their lives on the line. So you then rely on the army. The army is overstretched, but the army are also using, very conventional methods, or I would say unconventional methods. You have a Nigerian army, for instance, that is using bicycles, motorbikes, keke napep to fight terrorists who are using armored cars, who are using RPGs to fight you. Those are questions we don't even ask ourselves. That how did Nigeria come to a point where soldiers have to fight very well-equipped terrorists, from open roof cars? Where do you do that? Nobody even asks these simple questions. And it's not as if provisions are not being made on a regular basis for armored cars to be purchased. But the procurement officers in these military, organizations are just making a killing. That's why if you find a very massive, estate in Abuja, it's owned by army generals. They own some of the best businesses in the city or across the country because this is business for them. And when you then look at that and you extrapolate, you know that there's no way the highest levels of the military will want insecurity to end when they are not the ones fighting the war. And secondly, when they profit from the spreading of this insecurity. But I have another theory, and it's not conspiracy theory. I also think at the leadership levels of the country, I'm talking about the political leadership, they are happy that they have less and less territory to govern. So I think deliberately, they want the terrorists to have control of swaths and swaths of land, because the moment they control these places, they don't have to construct roads or provide schools or support the populace. So they just have to, send some little money to IDPs through charitable organizations and say, we're helpless. But let me tell you, as of today, this country has lost a huge amount of territory to these terrorists. But the question you asked, which I must answer quickly, is what will I do as the president of the country? If I'm president today, as I've always said, the part of the presidency that says you are the commander-in-chief of the armed forces is something that I will take very seriously, and that will push me to the war front. I will be front and back of every operation in the country. I'm not saying that I'm going to carry a gun, but I want to see my national security advisor every morning. I want to see all the army generals. I want to talk to them. I want to motivate them. I want to ensure that the equipment that say we have purchased, I see them physically. If I can't see them physically, I want to see them virtually. I want to say that they are being put to use. I want to make sure that all the security chiefs are competent. Of course, you say that I've come again. I would never use an IG of police as retired and tired, who has nothing else to do. I look for younger, highly motivated, well-trained, and people to start the process of taking the security of the country seriously. And even when criminals know that you have changed your security architecture, you have changed the mentality and the philosophy, and they are hearing from the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, in charge, because we don't have anybody in charge of the armed forces as a commander-in-chief right now, you will see that things will start changing from that. But in addition to that, and I must say this, is that this cannot be divorced from other insecurities, So there has to be social security. You have to provide employment for young people. You have to make sure that our education system are active and absorbing young people. You have to invest in sports, in health. You have to invest across board in processes that can engage people, that can bring about life that is suitable for people so that, they can value even life in general. So you cannot have a police state, for instance, where every time we're just shooting ourselves.
All right.
You don't have employment, and you expect this to end, or that you don't have an economy that is sound. So you don't have factories. You don't have schools that people can go to. You don't have hospitals that they can go to.
All
and
right.
you don't have roads that are safe or well-built or well-maintained. So all of this cannot be divorced from the general insecurity in the country. That's the fundamental point to make about security as well.
Well, very important points that you have made there. We wonder if that is not already being done, and if it is, why we're not
No, they're not being done.
Seeing a difference. But some would say that, in the last couple of weeks that there's been some progress, especially in the fight against insecurity, insurgency, and banditry.
Where?
Why? In the northeast, in Borno State, we've seen the neutralizing of, bandit leaders in the northeast, and especially since the designation of Nigeria.
Are you sure of what you are saying?
These have been reported, and since the designation of Nigeria
because
as CPC,
when you say reported, I have reports showing that soldiers have been blown up, at different places that the Nigerian army already took over and secured over last 4 years have been retaken by terrorists. We're talking about terrorists that were in Borno, in Yobe, some 5 years ago, who are now in what they call the KKK states, Kwara, Kogi, and Kaduna. What progress are we talking about? There are terrorists right now in Edo State, northern Edo State, in northern part of Ondo State. There are terrorists in Oyo State, even though you like to call them bandits. So which progress are you talking about?
Well, it appears a mixed bag. There are reports of progress, but
it's not a mixed bag. It's not a mixed bag. It's not a mixed bag when terrorists can walk into a village and kill 170 people and for 10 hours, and there's no intervention, and you say there's progress.
Where I'm headed actually is to ask what options are open to Nigerians who are left vulnerable without any form of security, because that's a reality that stares us in the face. If you can answer that in 30 seconds, because we're out of time.
There's no option. What happens is that you see internal migration and displacement. They'll go and start living in refugee camps. So, because that's one thing we don't discuss even in the media these days, is how many Nigerians are internally displaced, or externally displaced. People are migrating not to America and Europe now, not to Libya. People are migrating to Niger Republic. They are migrating to Cameroon. People are migrating to Mali. And then internally, there are internally displaced camps all over the place, and nobody talks about this. And that is why I think we are also underreporting the gravity of the problem, and it's not in anybody's interest.
All right. We must anchor at this point, and thank you very much for coming on the program. Mr. Sowore is a human rights activist and presidential candidate of the African Action Congress in the 2023 presidential election. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Have a nice day.
There's more to come on the program. We have just one more offering. It's something that also impacts hugely on security and, of course, on other areas of emergency. So stay with us for this one. You will profit from it. We'll be right back.